And now, Spotlight Montana with Laurel Staples.
The Pentagon announcing that the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan is now complete, bringing an end to the 20-year war. In this Spotlight Montana, I speak with University of Montana professor of history, Dr. Mirdad Kia, on the situation. He weighs in on the crisis and shares his insights.
First, how do you feel about the way the U.S. is handling the withdrawal there?
I think that, as we have heard from other analysts, Laurel, that the idea of withdrawing troops from Afghanistan was a bipartisan consensus, which means both Democrats and Republicans agreed. In fact, the agreement had been reached under previous administration, the Trump administration, and then the Biden administration went ahead with implementation. I think that's one issue. The second issue is the execution of the plan to withdraw. I think that without trying to exaggerate, I think it has been a debacle and a catastrophe, the way the withdrawal took place. I think we need a real investigation into this after we have taken our citizens out and those Afghans who have helped us in the process of being there for the last 20 years. But I do think that we have made several major mistakes. One mistake is withdrawing and handing a very important base, namely the Bagram Air Base, which is roughly about 20 miles north of Kabul. That base was a much better departure point for our citizens and our allies. It's very well protected. It has more landing areas. And of course, leaving Bagram and allowing Bagram to fall into the hands of Taliban was a major mistake. In addition to that, there is a prison very close to Bagram, in fact, next to it, which had 5,000 prisoners. Many of them were members of Al-Qaeda. And what happened is that we did not do anything about those 5,000 people, and Taliban immediately released them. That is releasing 5,000 individuals who can wreak havoc, not only on Afghanistan, but on the world, and including United States. So that's another major mistake. The next mistake, I think, is not coordinating the State Department efforts with the Department of Defense, and the withdrawal also lacked sufficient information in terms of how many citizens we had on the ground, what their needs were. And remember, Afghanistan is not a small country. Where they were coming from: Herat in northwest, Mazar Sharif in the north, Kandahar in the south, vicinity of Kabul itself, the capital. These are logistical issues that I don't think were taken into account. Finally, and this is a very, very a complex issue, is that I don't think anybody in this administration anticipated how fast the Afghan armed forces would collapse. The rapidity, the quickness by which it fell apart. And I think it was very unfair to say the buck stops with me and then go ahead and blame the Afghan army. The reason I say this is that they have lost, that Afghan army has lost over 50,000 soldiers and officers fighting shoulder to shoulder with us against Taliban, against Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations. They are capable of fighting. But you know why they stopped fighting? Several reasons, which have been discussed sometimes, but very quickly. One, they relied on air support from us. And when they realized the United States was leaving and that air support was being withdrawn, they basically lost heart. Second, and this is very important also, They were led by one of the most corrupt and one of the most incompetent and one of the most inept leaders Afghanistan has had in its recent history. And that is President Ashraf Ghani, who is reputed to have fled the capital with some relatives and friends with a large sum of money, which was supposed to be paid to soldiers and officers who had remained unpaid for months. They didn't have enough to eat. They didn't have enough ammunition or spare parts. So why do you have to fight for a regime, for a government that does not even provide you with your monthly salary? And in addition to that, as we all know, Afghanistan is a multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic, multi-religious country. There are all sorts of regional rivalries. If the Tajik Persian unit is not fighting, why should a Pashtun unit from the south fight? You know, these kinds of internal rivalries added to it. And in combination, when President Biden was saying, no, this is a 300,000 man army fighting a 75,000 Taliban, it's impossible that it would disintegrate. Well, it disintegrated, and very quickly.
Oh, fascinating. Well, describe the political fallout you feel we will see, its impacts to the U.S. and to Afghanistan.
You know what is very interesting, and I would use your great question to sort of as a segue into it. Many people have compared the scenes, you know, with the helicopter landing on our embassy in Kabul, with scenes from Saigon, Vietnam, when we withdrew in a bit of a hurry. But I see fundamental differences, and that's how I would use it to answer your question, that Vietnam was really fighting for national reunification. It was a nationalist agenda to have South Vietnam join North Vietnam in a unified Vietnam. This was a struggle that they had fought since French colonial rule in Southeast Asia. And we inherited this war from the French, in fact. You know, there were mistakes made there, of course, but we withdrew. No one expected that once the Vietnamese unified, they would actually send terrorists and bombers, you know, suicide bombers to the United States. Once they accomplished the task of unifying Vietnam, they had won the battle. We are dealing in Afghanistan with people who actually do not look at Afghanistan necessarily as their country or as their only struggle. What they are planning is, once they have consolidated their power inside Afghanistan, to then export terrorism to the region, to the neighboring countries, but also beyond, to Europe and United States. This is exactly what happened. Remember, Afghanistan had a civil war, which followed actually a 10-year battle against the Soviet Red Army, which had occupied Afghanistan since December 24th, 1979. For 10 years, the Afghans fought. The Soviets were forced to withdraw. Then they fought among themselves to figure out who's going to rule Afghanistan. And in the midst of that battle, of course, what happened was Taliban seized power, and Taliban was the force which provided Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda to establish bases. And it was in those bases that the 9/11 attackers were trained. So Afghanistan has already been used as a base for training terrorists who were sent against the United States. My fear is that with our withdrawal, with withdrawal from the NATO, the same thing would happen. We were there for 20 years, principally to prevent such attacks and to make sure that Al-Qaeda would not reconstitute. ISIS, which is a branch of Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, which has now a branch in Afghanistan, would not reconstitute, and they would not use Afghanistan as a training ground. Now, what is the guarantee that this would not happen? There is no guarantee. In addition, I want to make sure we also understand that Afghanistan is one of the biggest suppliers of opium in the world. Taliban made an enormous amount of profit exporting opium by illegal means from Afghanistan. Gun running and drug running was the basis for their revenue for many years when they were in power. So we are not only dealing with the threat of terrorism, we are also dealing with the potential for a future drug war against one of the biggest exporters of illegal drugs to the rest of the world.
Yeah, frightening scenario there for sure. You grew up in Iran, neighbors Afghanistan. Are you hearing from colleagues and friends in Afghanistan? Are you getting any information from the inside, and what does that look like?
It is unavoidable when you're from that part of the world, not hear from friends, from former colleagues, especially because Iran and Afghanistan share a great deal, same language, same culture, a lot of same history, though they are two different and two independent countries. The people in the region, Iranians in general, are very opposed to Taliban. Unfortunately, the government of Iran, the government of Pakistan are very much supportive of Taliban. And why in Iran the government sees any blow to US prestige, the defeat of United States in the region, as a victory for itself. But let us also use this great question to answer another sort of very fundamental issue. Where is Taliban coming from? Where are their arms coming from? Where is their money coming from? Where is their training? And the simple answer is that Taliban is the creation of the Pakistan's ISI, the military intelligence. That is originally, remember the word Talib is for singular. It means a religious student, a student who is studying religion. Taliban with an at the end, which is the Persian suffix for plural, is religious students. So how could religious students have access to tanks and artillery? These were originally boys who had become refugees during the 1980s, the war against Soviet Union. They grew up in various refugee camps inside Pakistan. Pakistan military intelligence trained them, turned them into organized military units. And of course, with money from Saudi Arabia, they were also indoctrinated in fundamentalist Islam. So on the one hand, they were trained killers. On the other hand, they were religious fanatics. And so that combination, then they unleashed Taliban against Afghanistan. So in some ways, the irony of the situation is that Taliban is not really even an Afghan army. It's a mercenary army fighting for the Pakistani military intelligence.
Well, and speaking of the Taliban, there's the group ISISK taking responsibility for the suicide bombing, and 13 service members died and dozens of others. What do you know about this group?
Right. The first and foremost, that day, as people close to me know, I grieved and cried repeatedly as I was seeing these scenes, and these brave Americans who risked their lives to help and rescue Afghans, many of the Afghans, but also US citizens. The task was so impossible because there was no security cordon. The terrorist actually walked through the Taliban security checkpoint and then blew himself up. And I have to tell you, it was one of, I have covered, as you know, a lot of different events, revolutions, uprisings, clashes, wars. But that particular day would probably go down as one of the saddest days in my entire career. And it was difficult for me to even think that was the level of my grief. At any rate, their heroism should be remembered and should be honored. by all of us. They risked their lives. They were so young, and they put their lives, and the result was very tragic. Having said this, ISIS-K stands for ISIS Khorasan. Khorasan is the word or the name for ancient Afghanistan. Khorasan literally means where the sun rises. It's a Persian word. It refers to much of Afghanistan in ancient times, but it also included part of Central Asia and part of even Iran. Today in Iran, northeastern Iran is called Khorasan, for example. So it's the east, it's where the sun rises. But why does ISIS-K use this is to emphatically say that they are not ISIS of Syria or ISIS of Iraq, which means they are not ISIS of the Arab world, and Afghanistan is not an Arab country. It's the ISIS of the East, ISIS of Khorasan. They are very militant. They think, believe it or not, that Taliban is not radical enough and violent enough. They actually believe in a far more radical form of Islam. It's unbelievable that when we think of Taliban as being highly radical and highly violent, there is actually a group more violent and more radical than Taliban. And they have had their own clashes with Taliban. Now, without trying to confuse anyone, any of our viewers, we have to remember that Taliban itself, really, I can actually discuss it, but not in this program, in a more maybe academic seminar. Taliban itself consists of at least 5 different groups, and they have come together as a coalition, which is generically referred to as Taliban. ISIS has good relationship with certain factions in Taliban, but not with all. So there is this kind of conflict between ISIS-K, ISIS Khorasan, and some of the groups in Taliban. And that promises to also bring some form of civil war inside Afghanistan between Taliban and the various terrorist organizations which are not necessarily following Taliban's authority.
Interesting. So Americans still trying to get out, also Afghan allies. We're getting reports that some will be coming to Montana. Your thoughts on that?
We have to recognize that while we should do everything to help people who worked with us, for us, and risk their lives, we should also be always aware and sensitive to the security of this country. And we need to have a very strong vetting process to make sure that people, and it doesn't matter whether they're from Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, any of the Middle Eastern countries, or from any country in the world for that matter, they are vetted thoroughly for security reasons. Many of the people who are leaving Afghanistan are more or less the middle class. They are the professionals. They know how to run things in Afghanistan. That's why we relied on them. Many of them were interpreters. Many of them were translators. They took a great risk working with U.S. armed forces to basically help us, guide us, teach us, about the complexities of their countries. And I think they are legitimately now asking us, pleading with us to accept them. And there are many of them, and therefore they are legitimate refugees with legitimate education. And I think for those people, their careers, their future is promising in this country. But already we have identified individuals who have penetrated the first security cordon, and they are called questionable, right? That is, they might have had ties with Al-Qaeda, with Taliban itself. We cannot allow our humanitarianism to blind us to the security issues. Because as we saw in 9/11, it took only 19 people to wreak havoc on an entire country. And therefore, we have to be very careful in terms of processing application, interviewing, background check, all sorts of things that my colleagues in various security organizations know much better than I do.
Your main message to the public, how can we help as this continues to unfold?
Right. I think that first and foremost, for any country, in this case, Afghanistan, the first thing that we need to do is educate ourselves. That's why we teach classes on Afghanistan, on Central Asia, on the Middle East at the University of Montana. And one of the points that I always emphasize to our students is information and education is the first step toward understanding and analyzing facts. We can rely on the media, but media is not there to educate us, it's there to inform us. Education should come from all of us and to learn about Afghanistan. Second, I think that American people have been always very generous with crisis across the globe. We have opened our homes. Missoula, Montana is one of the most hospitable places in the world. I can tell you because we brought so many training programs from different parts of the world. And everyone will tell you as they were leaving. You know, one thing that was fascinating, everyone who was leaving in the airport and I was supposed to go and say goodbye to them, all of them were crying. Nobody wanted to leave Missouri because it was such a kind place for them. And it was educational for them. They received a first-rate education and training at University of Montana. But on their daily lives, in this town, all they received was kindness, love, compassion, help, support, just name it. And many of them, when they were here during Thanksgiving, all of them were guests of a family in town. So that shows who we are. At the same time, I say this again, we need to be very careful also. Hospitality, friendship, and support are very important, but the security and making sure that we are taking the right people in and that we provide them with access to things that are essential, but at the same time, we are very aware that this is a very complex situation and a very complex country.
Sure. You have a presentation coming up at the University of Montana. Tell me what's planned for that.
So next Wednesday, so it will be September 8th at noon at University Center Theater, which is the third floor of what we call UC, University Center. From noon to 1 o'clock, we have a special program on Afghanistan. I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Robert Seidenschwartz, former president of Montana World Affairs Council. The event is co-sponsored by Central Southwest Asian Studies Center at University of Montana and Montana World Affairs Council. And it is open and free for all. Face masks are required to attend. But other than that, we look forward to welcoming anybody who might be interested to learn something about Afghanistan.
All right. Anything else that you would like to share?
No, I truly appreciate this opportunity. And we all pray for our citizens. I believe that we should do everything possible in our power to have every single citizen of the United States out of Afghanistan. This is what really worries me, is harrying out of Afghanistan. Apparently, from the information that I have received, we are leaving a significant number of US citizens behind. That is not the way the United States has behaved and acted in the past. The tradition was no one is left behind. And I hope that somehow, some way, we have a backup strategy to get everyone out. There are some Afghans who also need our help, and I hope they can also get the support and help that they rightly deserve. The importance of that small force on the ground, Laurel, in Kabul, was that we had a clout. We had a sort of a weapon in our hand to make Taliban sort of obey and accept what we are demanding. With us now withdrawing, my biggest fear is that how do we go back to Taliban and get from them what we need? It's going to be very difficult.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We'll have to send positive thoughts and prayers and hope that for the best outcome for sure on all of this. On a side note, your family, I know you have family. They're all safe and doing well.
Thank you very much for asking. Thank God they are all safe. And we had a family who some years ago chose Missoula, Montana as their home. They received their citizenship in this country in a courtroom in Missoula, Montana. We not only love this country, but we absolutely love this town. And thankfully, I now realize what a blessing it is that they're not there. And, with the situation in Afghanistan, in neighboring countries, I realize what a great opportunity it was for them to live many years of their lives here rather than over there.